is kind of a random thing that I didn't really expect to cover. But basically, this is just going to be a very unscripted kind of talk about some news that came out. I recorded something just like kind of over the past couple of days that you're probably going to see sometime soon, or it might already be out. I'm not too sure when I'm going to post this. But I wanted to talk about Sony, the recent news, Bloomberg report. It's something you should definitely check out. I'll link in the description as well. Which is basically just talking about some kind of weird stuff at Sony that it's to do with their management and how the kind of games that they're trying to push and want to sort of promote and work on primarily. And it's weird because it covers so many different devs, and it was actually kind of amusing trying to work this all out in my head. I was like, it's because it involves like Sony Bend and Naughty Dog, so basically the kind of key of this is that like the core of it, sorry, is that Sony Bend, who made Days Gone, were going to make another Days Gone. They're going to make a sequel. But Sony denied that. They kind of, I think the report, whether it's Jason Schreier who wrote the article, I don't know if it was him that was suggesting it or not, but, it could have been, he's sort of saying it could have been to do with the reception of the game was kind of mixed, even though it sold, pretty well. But apparently, no, they're not going to do that. They're gonna work on, I think, a new game, I think. But the kind of extra things with this was that one team at Bend were going to work with Naughty Dog to make a new multiplayer game. Now, this could actually be factions for The Last of Us. This thing I thought about as I was writing some notes for this. Could be factions. But then another team at Bend was going to work on a new Uncharted game with oversight from Naughty Dog. And it was kind of, that was kind of like the beginning of this by the sounds of things. But it didn't seem like Bend were too happy with working on Uncharted. They actually asked to be taken off it, and they eventually are no longer working on that. Jason did say on Twitter that Bend are no longer working on the Uncharted game. The multiplayer game, I believe, is still in production, but at least somewhere. But yeah, the Uncharted game seems like it was primarily on paper, was what Jason said. So it doesn't really seem like we know what's going on with that one. But then as we kind of move on, like kind of like Ben's doing that multiplayer game, and I think they're working on a new project. I'm not too sure. That's the one I probably should have checked. But there was another group that was called the Visual Arts Service Group, I believe, that basically was used to kind of assist. I think it sounds like primarily Naughty Dog, but it was kind of like big games, and they would kind of help for polishing and various kind of final touches. And they were wanting to, I think their studio leadership, they wanted to kind of become a bit more independent and work on their own stuff. I don't know whether they would continue. I assume it would probably they'd continue to help out other devs, but they'd also be growing and recruiting to sort of work on their own new games. And they thought that a remake would be the best way to go because, well, you take a a well received game and you remake it, is probably better off than making your own new game sort of thing. So yeah, they decided that they wanted to try and work on that, but they were going to do Uncharted, but apparently like the first Uncharted game, but apparently that wasn't really viable. They thought it would cost too much or they'd have to change too much, so they went for a remake of The Last of Us, and that I assume this was kind of going on through 2018, 2019 time. So this is actually it's still it's not very great. Like this is the thing I've been thinking about. It's like I don't understand the whole idea of remaking The Last of Us. But anyway, so yeah, they would then decide they kind of were like, okay, so they were going to work on that. But then Last of Us got delayed. So part 2 got delayed into 2020. So then that group goes and helps Naughty Dog, and then what the plan seemed to be was that Naughty Dog were then going to help the visual arts group on the Last of Us remake, but it sounds like it's now moved on to the Naughty Dog direction. And this is all just kind of weird to me because it's like, well, it's not weird. It sort of makes sense. The Last of Us remake is a bit of a weird one to me because I'm like, why are we remaking a game that came out in 2013 that, I mean, I've seen people saying it's clunky, and I guess it's probably been a while since I played it, so probably is a little bit, but I still remember it being pretty, like, decent to play. I don't really remember it being too bad. I know part 2 is certainly a step up. But yeah, it's just kind of weird that that's the kind of direction that this other group was like. I mean, it's I guess it's a surefire way to being like, it could be good for sales and everything. But it's the fact that Sony greenlights that, and I sort of feel that this is the kind of point where, so a point that something I've been thinking about for a while is the general like Sony. I call it the PlayStation portfolio, and the way that there's a lot of variety in their games now. It's kind of they're all slowly merging. I wrote some examples down, but it's like if you look at the late PS4 generation, you've had Last of Us Part Two, God of War, Horizon Zero Dawn, Days Gone, and Spider Man, and now each certainly have their own individual sort of themes and tones and everything like that. But they're also very similar in a lot of ways now. Last of Us, I think, is a big part of inspiration. So I let Naughty Dog off this because to me it's like, well, they were kind of the main dev to kind of start this. I don't know if they intentionally started the trend, but obviously with Uncharted and then eventually Last of Us, they kind of started doing more of this, you know, cinematic, very story heavy games. And it's kind of been over time that we've got games like Horizon, Days Gone, Spider Man, God of War. God of War, I think, is the biggest, or one of the biggest to me, because it's a continuation of the character and the story of the previous games, but it's completely different in terms of its gameplay, its systems, and everything like that. And a lot of people joked, being like, "Oh, it's just God of War, it's just like Last of Us," and I was always a defender that no, it wouldn't be. But as I kind of look at these other games, and I wonder how much of God of War's development was directed by what Sony wanted, or maybe even if it wasn't necessarily that, it might have just been that, oh, Last of Us did well, and from my understanding, the guy, the kind of there's a video, the Raising Kratos documentary is it's a good thing to watch. Definitely watch it. That they kind of go through that they were working on Sony Santa Monica were working on all this kind of other like sci-fi game, but development didn't seem to be going very well on that. And I guess they obviously were then like, okay, we need to kind of pivot back, and they got Cory Barlog, who was the director of God of War 2, and they kind of all worked on that. And so that's kind of how I think they came to that, point of sort of, having God of War be a more story heavy game, and obviously it's got a lot of other systems, but alongside that, you've got games like Horizon and Days Gone and Spider-Man that all have these heavy story focuses, and I think Spider-Man's probably the more out there that like one of this, because Spider-Man is Spider-Man, and I don't really think there's many other games like Spider-Man, especially Spider-Man games. I've never really played a lot of them. I remember, I don't even remember what was the PS. There was a PS2 one, or no, was it PS1? It was PS1. Sorry, but I think I did play a PS2 game as well, actually, Spider-Man. So to me, like that one, I kind of let off. Plus, it's made by Insomniac, and Insomniac are still being allowed. They're still working on Ratchet and Clank with Rift Apart coming out in a couple of months, which that stuff makes me happy because I'm a pretty big Ratchet fan. So I'm glad that that's still, uh, they're retaining their kind of history there, and but that to me is like a good example of, okay, this company this developer seems to have freedom. Like they're able to kind of make this open world game, and it's Spider Man. It makes sense to be open world. It kind of it's cool. It's still very much Spider Man in a lot of ways. So to me, that's said, I let that one off. One I forgot to mention was Ghost of Tsushima. Again, I think Ghost of Tsushima, Horizon, and Days Gone are kind of all three. You could consider them under the same sort of umbrella, in that they're open world. They're all, I mean, a lot of these are open world games. And another thing is that a lot of them have got these RPG mechanics. And again, it's not that RPG mechanics haven't been in games. I think historically a lot of games have had RPG mechanics in a lot of ways. But it's the way that a lot of them seem to incorporate them in similar ways. Or it's like my thing is that so many devs seem to put in loot systems in games, and as much as I play games like Destiny and recently Outriders and Borderlands, I don't want that in every game, and sometimes I just want a game where I can just play and everything's kind of, I don't want to say streamlined to be super basic, but it's like not every game needs to have the depth of, say, Destiny or Borderlands or or even Outriders. Outriders got a lot of depth in its builds. Like God of War has rarities to its armor and things like that, and it's like, why? Like, I mean, that's another discussion. I don't want to go too much into all of this kind of side, but the main point I'm trying to make is that there's not a lot of variety in a lot of Sony's first party lineup, and something that Jason Schreier also points out in this article is that they have a seemingly like a big focus on like big teams making big games that are going to be like hits, that are going to sell tons and make tons of money. And of course, You always want that, but I think I kind of think it's not viable. But it also means that when you when you look at like when you take each game by its themes or its art style or its kind of, like if you were to compare the box art covers of say or like the main folk, I don't know how to describe it, but if you were to compare like the style of Horizon, like God of War and Uncharted and The Last of Us and Ghost of Tsushima, they all have different styles and settings and themes, and they all stand out in that regard. But as soon as you look at their gameplay, you kind of see that, oh, they're all kind of fairly similar. And then if you go deeper and you look at all the systems and the RPG mechanics and the open world and and the way the story is told and the kind of stories they are telling, you start to notice these like clear similarities between them all. And I think to me that's been apparent for a while now. And I'm actually, a lot of people I've seen like reactions on Twitter. A lot of people are actually talking and being like, why is this Last of Us remake happening? Why are we doing this? Remember when, why are we remaking this game? We've got all these games like Sly Cooper, Everybody's Golf, Ape Escape, and all these kind of crazy games that, like, these PlayStation mascots that we've had. People call them PlayStation mascots. Mascots, from my understanding, are typically more kind of goofy characters. Or you usually have a mascot that's more of a cartoon character. And I understand it's not really the same phrasing that's used for PlayStation, but if you look at some of their art for like PlayStation All Stars, to me is like a great example for like where Sony were at, back like 10 years ago. I think it's about 10 years ago that came out. And obviously it wasn't all PlayStation. You had like Big Daddy from BioShock, and you had Dante from DMC, that reboot. We're not talking about that here. But that was like a generally pretty cool way to kind of look at the PlayStation character lineup. And if you look at it now, it's not like that we haven't got cool characters, but they're all within games that are, pretty samey kind of thing. And yeah, I think it's just kind of disappointing that that's the kind of direction that's gone in. And I have a lot of words to say about God of War. And people that know me, I have like the most conflicting relationship with that game ever. I too want to cover it at some point. I've had like plans to for literally years at this point, uh, to kind of dive deeper into my thoughts on God of War and why I believe God of War is like, I don't want to say not as good as everyone says it is, like to be that kind of guy that's like, oh, it's not as good as you say kind of thing, but like that's the kind of viewpoint I have on it, and it ties into this topic of how, God of War used to be a hack and slash game, and it used to be like crazy action, and you played as a guy who was like super aggressive and violent, you got all these cool weapons, and it's not that the new game doesn't have any element of that, but you can clearly tell there is a huge shift, and I think one game that I want to bring up, again, it might be something I cover, as an example of, to me, how you modernize a franchise without it losing its core DNA to, like, the kind of, when I say core DNA, I mean not only like, because I would say God of War 2018 retains a large amount of its core DNA, but when I say that in this context, I more mean in terms of literally every single way. We're not looking at reimaginings or reboots or anything like that. We are literally looking at a sequel that manages to fit within the modern sort of set of games. A lot of people say, oh, PS2 games are outdated. But yeah, that game is Devil May Cry 5. I think DMC 5 is honestly such a great game to look at for how you take a franchise and you modernize it not only in its, visuals and graphics and all that, but also in the kind of story that they tell. Like DMC 5 is more of a serious story, but yet it's still wacky and silly and crazy. It's still DMC, and the kind of, yeah, the story that they're telling, it's more serious. But it's still got everything that you want from DMC. It's got the great combat, like it's got a lot of unlockables as well, and a lot of depth to its combat and the skills that you can unlock. And yet at the same time, the story feels like you're playing like a AAA blockbuster from like Naughty Dog. Like, I mean, not in every single way. It's still not to the same quality, I don't think. But at the same time, I'm like, it's not trying to be that same quality. They're telling their own story. You can argue whether you liked it or whether it's good or not. But generally, I think it manages to have this, kind of this whole vibe and whole style that's like so DMC, but yet it really fits in to the modern day kind of thing. And so yeah, I kind of just feel like DMC5 really is like such a great game to kind of look at when we're talking about this kind of thing. Uh, but yeah, like if we compare like some older games from PS2 and PS3, you had like Jack and Daxter, Ratchet and Clank, Sly Cooper, Infamous, Resistance, Killzone, PS All Stars, Wipeout, and Twisted Metal's another game. And it's not like I played all of those. But I think you've got a good range there. You know, like for example, Resistance. If first person shooters were the kind of games that we would be looking at as the no, instead of it being third person action or RPGs or whatever, if it was first person shooters that were going to be Sony's like focus, again, Resistance and Killzone have two distinct kind of visual, art styles and just general kind of like themes and tones and style, but Resistance is more like sci-fi kind of on Earth, where aliens have invaded kind of thing, whereas Killzone is a little bit more like Call of Duty Battlefield, but with other kind of it seems a bit more realistic kind of thing. I think Resistance is a little bit more out there, but it totally makes sense. It's made by Insomniac, and they got some great weapons. But yeah, I don't really, there's not really much more I can sort of talk on this at the moment without sort of rambling on. But I just feel like I hope this is I don't think this will be the turning point, but it's nice to have seen that there's a lot of people out there that have a lot of strong like feelings that people are like, oh, why are you remaking Last of Us? Why not remake this series or this game, because we've not had this in ages? And with Sony delisting or taking down the PS3 store, which you can access PSP, PS3, and PS Vita games on, they're taking that down in a couple of months, and it's like it comes across as like they're not trying to erase the past, but it's like there is this like huge lineup of really like solid games that Sony has got, and we're at a point now where most of their output is like the same kind of game, even if they are within their own kind of lane, if that makes sense. And I feel that that's disappointing because because I even something I think about. I was trying to compare this to Microsoft, and I think Microsoft have a bit of variety, but I don't even think Microsoft have it. And I think Nintendo are probably doing pretty well, but I'm not too familiar with their lineup, and I'm never been a huge fan of their games as such. Though I have been played some Mario 3D World recently and Monster Hunter Rise. Rise, I really want to play more of Rise. Rise is cool. I mean, I enjoyed Monster Hunter World, but that's getting off the topic. But anyway, you look at their kind of lineups, and you get like I think there's a decent variety Nintendo has. But to me, PlayStation has always boasted this like pretty diverse set of games. From all kinds of like genres. You've had first person shoot, you've had, and it was like that. This is why I let Naughty Dog off this, because Naughty Dog were the kind of team that started this kind of. I said I don't want to call it a trend. Well, it is a trend now, but I don't want to call it like they were starting the trend, because I don't think that they were really. I doubt they set out to do that. And I enjoyed Uncharted for what it is, and I love the Uncharted series, and I've still really enjoyed Last of Us 1 and Part 2. But to me, but even Last of Us has kind of got its own survival horror. Like Last of Us is survival horror at the same time. It's not the same survival horror like Resident Evil style, but it certainly has those elements laid on top of it. Um, so yeah, I just feel like Naughty Dog kind of single out, but the other devs we're kind of looking at, it's a shame, and particularly for me with God of War. God of War is a big one to me. That's a shame to see, because, or shame to see them go down the route that they've kind of ended up going down, because I just feel like they had more variety and not even from a like entirely game, like not like combat and things like that, but just the mechanics and the progression systems and leveling up is, to me, way more interesting in God of War, like the PS2 and PS3 games, way more interesting there than it is in 2018. And I still, there's so many parts about God of War 2018 that I love. Like, I mean, it's like spoilers for 2018 if anyone's not played it yet. But when you get the Blades of Chaos back, that whole lead up and that whole scene, I cannot like properly express the amount of like the fan inside me, the fanboy essentially inside me when I played that moment. It is it is such an incredible moment. Totally didn't just get distracted while the cats decided they were going to invade in the middle of recording. It's like perfect timing, honestly. It's great. Uh, but yeah, I think I'll talk about God of War. just basically talking about the fact that that game had such a great moment. So there's a lot of cool moments in that game, but I still feel like God of War as a whole with 2018, it's kind of disappointing to me, and I'm kind of this isn't what this discussion was intentionally going to become. By the way, we're not talking about God of War. But yeah, I think I'll probably wrap this up because I'm rambling a lot. Um, but I just hope that this is a point because it's really cool to recognize that I'll see that other people are kind of rallying at this point, being like, "Man, why are you doing this with The Last of Us? Why not other games? You've made similar games for so long now." And I hope that it will lead to because it doesn't to talk like real talk sustainability in terms of development of all these games doesn't really seem like it is sustainable because it seems like these devs are all over the place. They're not too sure what they're working on, and it doesn't seem creative. And something that I've been thinking about recently but also with Last of Us Part Two, just in general, is that I feel like Naughty Dog's next game, I would hope, is a little bit more light-hearted, a little bit kind of maybe not Last of Us Part Three if they're gonna do that. I still think that should be a more light-hearted game, but you know, whatever the next game is, I feel like they need to get away from Last of Us because I think Part Two was so dark, and especially in 2020 of all years, I feel like that's the kind of that's their limit kind of thing, and I think if I hope we're kind of reaching the limit of this with all these devs, and I feel bad for Sony Bend. I mean, I've not played much of Days Gone, but it's certainly a game that I saw a lot of mixed thoughts on. But I hope that all of this does kind of lead to a bit more variety, and hopefully maybe this report we're going out won't do anything. Maybe it will, and it would be nice if it does because I think it's a shame to see all this happen, and it doesn't even help with Jim Ryan's kind of comments in the past about like how no one wants to play old games or something like that because of backwards compatibility, and thankfully we got backwards compatibility on PS5 with PS4 games, but it's it's sad to see that that's how they kind of think about their library, and I'm like, plus if we delist all these stores and we start taking away options to buy things, it kind of just means that you feel like devs have to do more work to kind of get all the games playable on this current generation. And while I think that's true for a number of series, it'd be great to play Tomb Raider. Yeah, it'd be great to play all these games on the current hardware kind of thing. Um, but yeah, it doesn't seem like that's kind of in Sony's mind. But I have hope, and that's something I've been thinking for a while now, is that because of the kind of games that Sony have churned out for so long, I believe that we will, at some point, probably in the next few years, hopefully, we're going to hit a turning point where we are going to start to see a few more kind of varied games coming from Sony, and maybe just across the board, because it's not like it's only Sony doing the whole open world serious story, over the shoulder camera stuff. Like a lot of devs are doing that kind of thing. I think Assassin's Creed is one series that has undergone a pretty fundamental change in the kind of way they approach the game. They've gone from more of a open world action game to more of a they've kind of open world but more like empty land RPG, and it's like, to me that's never been Assassin's Creed. I've barely played the new Assassin's Creeds, to be honest. And, and maybe the old ones got stale. Maybe because I think people say this about game franchises. They're like, games need to be shaken up after a while because they're not the same all the time. But it's like, yeah, but I almost feel like it depends how you approach that, right? It's not like it's Devil May Cry coming back after so many years, with overhauled everything, and it's not like Devil May Cry released every single year. I'm like, maybe if instead of releasing a new game every year, they focused on releasing more different games every year, and people wouldn't get burnt out on all these franchises as much because they'd have more time between them, and it would be like people anticipate the next game. I remember how I was feeling with Uncharted 4, and the anticipation and excitement I had for that game was it was through the roof. It's insane, honestly. I mean, Uncharted 4 for me was everything I wanted to be and more. I think that game is honestly, it's still pretty much my favorite game on last gen. But yeah, that was also kind of at the same sort of point around 2017, 2018 that we kind of started seeing more of this shift to the kind of open world, super serious stories kind of thing. And I should say, this isn't to say anything bad about those games. It's not like they're bad games, and they're impressive achievements on, a number of levels kind of thing. But I do think from a like, to me, it's like, oh, you've taken God of War and you've completely changed it? Oh, okay. It's like, well, then that's not really the God of War I know anymore. And sure, that's like me maybe living in the past, but where is our hack and slash? Like, I'm not saying, and that's the thing, I'm not saying it has to be, like, identical, because you probably, whether it's a shake-up for the fans or whether it's a shake-up for the people, devs working on the game, I'm sure there's a number of different things that they could do, and obviously this is the direction that they sort of picked for God of War and all these other games, but I guess in the other case, in an example of, like, other franchises, they actually just made a new IP. They didn't continue their old one and completely change it. They carried it on. And I still like that about God of War 2018. But this isn't the God of War 2018 podcast video discussion. That's for another day. I'll ramble about God of War some other day. And this is, because this is unscripted, I am just talking kind of a lot. And so this was planned to be more like 10 minutes. I was actually questioning how I would make it to 10 minutes, but we're now looking at like around 26 minutes at this point. But we'll see how this comes out. But yeah, hopefully we'll see some changes in sort of in management. Hopefully the devs working on it aren't too bad. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of departures, and a Japan studio was closed down recently, which they, from my knowledge, made Patapon. And Patapon 1 and 2 were two of my favourite games on PSP, so it's a shame to see them shut down. But yeah, hopefully we'll maybe see some changes soon, and hopefully the devs are all doing alright, and it's not been too messy for them, and, I doubt Sony will comment on all this, and we probably won't see, if any, changes. It probably won't be a free, and I don't even think, I'm talking about changes, it might not even happen, to be fair, it might not happen anytime soon, but I'm glad that we're kind of finding out, because it does, it kind of almost proves, oh, like, we were right, kind of thing. They don't seem to care too much about their old library, and that was kind of already proven anyway. But yeah, I'll stop rambling now. This has just been a video talking about this. Well, it's a video, it's more of a podcast. Might do more of these. I kind of, in my mind, I start thinking about more kind of podcast-esque rambles. I can record, talk crap for however long, and post it, and just be an easier way to share some thoughts and stuff. So, yeah, I will see you next time. If, by the way, I guess I should promote, well, my website and all that other stuff. Follow me on Twitter and whatever else you want to do. But also, I've got a video kind of accompaniment to go alongside a sort of article for my top games of last year, because it's April, and that's the time we do those kind of things. That might already be out, or this might go out before. I'm actually still deciding, so if it's already out, I'll probably leave a link in the description. If it's not already out, I've just announced first here. That's what I've been working on. But yeah, that's what I'll probably post soon, so hope you've enjoyed listening. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what you think about all this. It'd be really interesting to hear. I'm interested in, like, conversations, because I know a lot of people have different opinions on a lot of people love, like, God of War and things like that, so it would be great to just hear kind of what people think. I know not many people will agree with me about God of War, but this isn't God of War. I keep going on about God of War. I'm going to stop talking about God of War, but just in general, this topic, whatever God of War, if it is God of War, leave your thoughts in the comments, and yeah, I'll see you next time. Ciao, ciao, ciao.